So the principle I'm going to talk to you about tonight, I've summed up by saying God is the memory of the world. And there's a recent event that I think could help us understand the process. That event was the Notre Dame fire. I don't know if you've experienced it in the same way, but when I saw those images, it really moved me. And I had the feeling that something abnormal and serious was going on, especially as this is part of a general climate, not an isolated event. There have been several fires. I was in Nantes and the cathedral was closed. There was a priest in the middle of a service in Nice, I think, who had his throat cut. We're in a kind of end of the world situation. It's not the end of the world, but it is an ending of the world. We're really at the end of a cycle. And you see, I live in Greece today, and it's the land of old things, old stones, of old collapsed temples. And in reality, what we're experiencing today, humanity has already experienced this many times. At the end of antiquity, you read texts. There are some fascinating texts about all that. You can read Jean-Blic Damascus. You have texts that talk about this. They speak of the rise of Christianity and the disappearance of the religions of antiquity. And it's very disturbing because you're back in our own time. And all the questions we ask ourselves. And you realize that, as the Ecclesiastes says in the Bible, there's nothing new under the sun. The appearances change, the details, the costumes, the shapes, but in the end, it's the same things we go through. And about the Notre Dame fire, you see, I've went there in Paris, they're rebuilding it, so you can already see the framework and all that. And we thought, with my team, we'd walk along the quays of the Seine. And then we thought, 800 years ago, we would have seen the same scene. We would have seen Notre Dame under construction with the same frames since they're redoing it, identically, I think. But are they the same? And if they're not the same, why aren't they the same? If you have a materialistic view of the world, you can say in effect that they're the same beams because they're the same size. We chose a wood of probably the same quality. They are set at the same angle. These are the same beams. But for me, they're not the same beams at all. It's not the same roof, and the same cathedral can never be torn down. Because if you enter the memory of the time and enter the hearts of the builders of the time, the carpenters, the workers, the masons, the joiners, the architects, you enter their hearts, their mentality, their sensibility. They were building an offering to the Blessed Virgin and a sacred place, a house of God, which was a land of asylum. You know, that's the story of Notre Dame de Paris. Back then, a church was sacred territory. And when you walked into a church, you were in the asylum, no one had the right to pick you up. In a church, it was a desecration. Back then, it was absolutely real. We all felt it, we all knew it, and we lived like that. And so, you're building Notre Dame de Paris at the time, version 1. And you're creating something, you're objectifying something outside that you have inside you. You see, a cathedral, a church, a chapel, a Calvary, it's not a question of size. It wasn't a race. Like skyscrapers, it's who's going to make the biggest, basically. Every time you create something externally, you're really objectifying something subjective. If you're a living person, if you're alive, if you're a living being, what you do in your life is what you carry inside you. And I hope that is the case for you. Your professional activity, for example, reflects one of your passions, something that really lights you up, fires you up, animates you, interests you. Well, maybe not. Maybe you've got a job that pays by the hour. And for now, that's it. That's the way it is. In any case, I wish you to be an entrepreneur or just someone who loves his work. It's much better that way, much nicer. If you're not living something you're passionate about, well, that means that what you see on the outside is a reflection of your inner life. That's how it is. That's who you are. That's your inner state. You can't yet express your passion or even know what it is. Usually, you spend your life objectifying what you carry inside you. Usually. But of course, there's a kind of artificial world out there today that's become extraordinarily powerful. That doesn't really want you to be who you are, but wants you to benefit from the workings of a pre-organized system, if you like. It's ready-made, ready to eat, ready to wear, ready to think, ready to want. It's already done. You're encouraged, you're trained for it. So the people who built Notre Dame knew they were part of something, and who paid for the roof beams they're now redoing, the original ones, the ones that burned. By the way, it still took one hell of an electrical short. I don't know if you have chimneys. I once burned some old beams in a house I'd renovated. That must have been 150 years old, and I can tell you it's really hard. It is really hard to burn. Anyway, that's not the point here. Let's admit, at the time, who financed these beams? Who financed the stones? Who paid for the tiles? But then the church, who is the church? It was the faithful. So when you saw beams going up and being positioned on the roof, these were a piece of you that were up there. It was a piece of you, of your children. It was your sweat, your work, your blood. You'd given up something to be able to take part in the fundraising for the fourth phase of work. You know what I mean? It was your family, your neighbors, everyone. We all participated. It was your parents, your children, your acquaintances, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your neighborhood, everyone, your parish. And so it was us. Notre Dame de Paris was us. And we objectify a state of consciousness externally. Try to see the world. Look, you're here because you're interested, I guess, or you're accompanying someone you're interested in. Try to take the moment. Just do the exercise. It doesn't commit you to anything. Try to see the world my way, as I do. That's what I'm proposing. So I'm not telling you it's the truth. What you see on the outside is the materialization of someone's state of consciousness, or several. But from whom? You see, for example, I haven't lived in France for 15 to 16 years. When I come back to France, what surprises me is the way public spaces and roads are laid out, especially in the city now. There are lines everywhere, lines for scooters, skateboards, bikes. There are signs everywhere, plastic stuff. It's mind-boggling. You're completely taken care of, told what to do everywhere, down to the last centimeter. And what's more now, you have cars telling you to brake. No, you're not holding your steering wheel straight enough. You're not strapped in, but I don't want to get attached. And wait, now it's time to take a break. And when you don't, it turns red and flashes. I had a rental car like that the other day. This is hellish. Just wait a few years. What's it going to be? Our sensitive sensors on the steering wheel determine that you are not in an emotional state. Please take 3 deep breaths and align your chakras before starting, because the risk of accidents is too high. That's crazy, isn't it? Yes. The world you see on the outside is an objectification of a state of consciousness that is at the origin of the state of consciousness, of what we see on the outside. So I'm looking at Notre Dame Cathedral, but of course I've seen it lots of times. I've been there lots of times before. You're entering the memory of your ancestors. So you may say, but I'm from Lyon, not Paris. Who cares? Today you're from Lyon, but your immortal soul isn't from Lyon, and humanity isn't based in Lyon or Paris. I was at Karnak not long ago in Egypt. You enter the memory of humanity every time wherever you are. And so you have before your eyes the objectification, the work that someone's created. Someone has put up a piece. So Karnak, I was at Karnak in Egypt, and I was also at Karnak in Brittany. And at Karnak in Brittany, it's the same. A man once set up a stone. Why? If you enter the memory of the standing stones in Karnak, what do you see? For every stone, you see a man. There are men who have reached a state of consciousness, of verticality, and groundedness within themselves, a state of consciousness of unshakable eternity. And they wanted to leave their mark because they could see it was fragile and that it's hard to talk to each other and really tell each other the truth. They wanted to express that. They said to themselves, but how could I say what I'm going through? And they said to themselves, the best expression I could make would be in the clearest, simplest, most sober, least interpretable, deformable, and timeless manner. You see, they talk to each other. They're around the fire, the Celts. Maybe it wasn't even the Celts. Maybe it was before the Celts. They're around the fire, talking to each other, and someone tries to describe it to another. He says a process took place inside me. It changed everything. And he says, listen, I'll explain. Gather a few hundred men tomorrow, and I'll show you. We'll erect a stone. It's going to be there for thousands of years. That's how I feel. So, if you enter the menhirs of Karnak, it's much simpler than what you were told. That's all there is to it. Quite simply, that's it. And when you see Notre Dame de Paris, it's sublime. Why? Because it implies a human organization. I don't know if any of you work in companies or organizations. Have you seen how complicated working together can be? Some of you may be involved in unions or human resources, but you're tearing your hair out. Or council meetings at your building. 3 hours of discussion to change a door handle. It's hellish. Working together on a common project requires a great deal of harmony and coherence, don't you think? Have you ever seen how complicated it can be just between the two of us? Isn't it? Two is a crowd. Even with your own child or with your own parents, it's complicated, but we can't say we don't know each other. You can't say it's because we're in a phase we have to tame each other. No, that's not it. We no longer need to tame each other. We've been tamed for 50 years. And sometimes we just don't understand each other. We can't say things to each other. So you can imagine putting together a team, and one day one of them says, listen guys, we're going to do something crazy. We're going to build towers like we've never seen before. We'll be hollowing out empty spaces in the walls. We'll use colored tiles to let in light. You'll see, it's going to be incredible. They have translated an inner state of consciousness into outwardly organized acts. How one day one of them woke up and said, we're going to make a rosette and the sun will shine through it. Why? Do you think it's because he went to art school? Did he graduate from some prestigious academy? He took a design course on the internet? Well, now I'm getting paid. I've got a job. I've got to come up with a brilliant idea to win the contract. No, but it's because he's had an inner experience. He had an inner experience and thought, how can I explain it to others? And he said, you see, in my experience, it's as if all the colors of the universe were in harmony, in the celebration of the unique principle, but in the expression of the totality of life forms. And so we're going to make it circular, we're going to make it transparent, we'll have light shine through it, and we're going to use colors He objectified a state of consciousness externally. In doing so, he created a memory of his own experience of consciousness. And even more powerfully, he offered it as a gift. And you went to Notre Dame and sat down and looked. And if you traveled inside yourself, all of a sudden you could touch the state of consciousness, of which the rosette is the memory. That's how I go through life. So you understand that afterwards there are differences depending on where you are and what you see. These are not necessarily the same states of consciousness or the same life experiences. And so I see they're now reassembling the beams of Notre Dame. Who pays for it? LVMH. I didn't do a morality check on this milieu and this company because I'm not really interested. I don't need to do it. And I don't actually know who the funders are. There have also been private donations. Some people have made donations out of love for their heritage, perhaps out of religiosity. But do you see that in my vision, there's a big difference between us rebuilding the roof of Notre Dame for heritage reasons, or because it's big business for the city of Paris. And we're building Notre Dame because we love the Virgin Mary so much that we want to honor her so that she lives with us and protects us. Can you see the difference? Well, in the Essene view, it's not the same thing. You can do the same thing, but not with the same soul. It won't be the same soul. Take today's music industry, for example. In fact, it's become an industry. If you work in a studio, you're either a producer or a composer. And that's it. You've got to make the summer hit with Orangina. You're being told, you see, we're talking to you, it's September, and we're telling you, now you've got to do the summer hit. There's a cast, so there are 3 handsome guys, 3 chicks. Go on, do something for us. So you see, something will be made up. Last year we did Brazil. Maybe we could do something more like this. Where do you draw your inspiration from? What's your motivation? This music you're going to create is going to be an external objectification of an inner state of consciousness. But which one? Do you understand? And you're going to feed it to millions of people who are going to eat it. Man's creative power can be summed up in this simple mechanism. This morning you got up. All day long, you've been objectifying what's inside you, or you were made to objectify something that does not live within you. It happens, doesn't it? Today I had to pay tolls, wear my seatbelt, limit my speed, because there are cameras everywhere. They made me do it. Normally I wouldn't have done it. Today we are being made to do it. I was made to pay taxes. I've been made to give money for projects that aren't mine. I was made to do it. So I objectified something that is not at all a reflection of my state of consciousness. And at the same time, it means that this is where I'm at in my life. I'm participating in a system. Man's creative power lies in objectifying what he carries within himself. You could even say that. That's all it is. If you understand that, that's all. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Meditate. Look, you're here tonight, performing an act that reflects your inner state of consciousness. You're objectifying something you carry inside you, and those who aren't here as well. Human beings are not victims. They have a creative power and spend their time doing on the outside what they have on the inside. And you understand, for example, that with the standing stones at Karnak, the Egyptian temple in Karnak, and the cathedral of Notre Dame, we're entering the world of memories, right? Part of my family has been Parisian for generations. Inevitably, they had been to Notre Dame, prayed at Notre Dame, and taken part in the rituals and ceremonies at Notre Dame, the masses and all that. They gave money to Notre Dame. They lived in the memory of the state of consciousness of those who built Notre Dame. And what does this mean? It means that for generations, we've been passing on states of consciousness through external things. My ancestors who went into church entered into the memory of their ancestors, and as a result, probably experienced the same states of consciousness. If Notre Dame was built with devotion, with sincerity, with prayer for elevation and all that, my ancestors, who subsequently entered Notre Dame de Paris over the centuries, entered the same state of consciousness and experienced it through external memory. But as time goes by, things age. Things are getting old. All human creations age over time. And their vital energy must be constantly renewed. And of course, in France, there was a major de-Christianization that started with the French Revolution. And there was a desire on the part of a political minority to empty the churches. And the separation of church and state, I think it was in 1907. So it's really been a major step, okay? And what happens then? You walk into the church and they tell you we're going on a guided tour. So you get to have a look at art history, archaeology, and history itself. We're going into, what do you call it, folklore. You see, people in the past used to kneel on this bench. And here was a place where there was this, you see? And in fact, you enter a dead memory, because you enter the memory without the corresponding state of consciousness. And little by little, there's the, if you like, the mark that's been left, the work, is emptied of its soul. Look at the menhirs. It's even more obvious because they're old. I'm sure that for centuries the Breton peasants didn't even know who had created them and why. Because there was Christianization. They went to the churches, and so those standing stones didn't mean anything to them anymore. They had no idea what it was, or even why they were there. They no longer access the memory contained within these stones. So humans experiences states of consciousness. They create things on the outside that memorize, fix, and crystallize these states of consciousness. And those things serve as support to share with and pass on to their children, their grandchildren, and others in their community. Except that, as these creations age, they can end up being emptied of their substance. And at that moment, the soul, the initial state of consciousness, is inaccessible to us. We no longer understand, we no longer know, even though we can invent stories and meanings. And there's another, not inconsiderable, subtlety. For example, there are people who lived in Notre Dame de Paris, but for them, Notre Dame de Paris became the support for their state of consciousness, which was no longer devotion, collective offering, but for example, political power. That's easy to understand. You're appointed Bishop of Paris. Your ankles are a little swollen, so you need to change your shoes. Because it's huge, you see, it's a social position. So you enter these cathedrals, and in a way, they're your cathedrals. And so little by little, the same creation can be emptied of its soul, but it can also be filled with something else, right? Look at today's churches. Many of them have been turned into restaurants, lofts, exhibition halls, and concert halls. It's the same venue, but the organizer of an electro party says, "Oh my God, the acoustics, the sound is going to be great. We'll distribute the drugs here." He takes hold of the container and projects another state of consciousness into the same creation. Are you with me? And that's the problem, because it means you have the power to externalize a state of consciousness you're experiencing, but you also have the power to externalize a state of consciousness into an existing thing. They are called hermit crabs. I've seen plenty of them this winter in the tropics. They're so cute. You see a beautiful shell, and you say to yourself, well, I'm going to be so cozy, it fits me perfectly. Do you understand? My ambitions will fit perfectly inside of it. And I'll benefit from the aura of this building, the aura of this structure, the aura of this creation. Right? Well, we're in trouble because this means we can create memories that reflect artificial, fleeting, useless, unnatural, non-functional states of consciousness. So this means that there were some people who externalized the idea of creating a republic so that we could all vote, we'll all agree, and everyone will have a chance to speak up, express themselves, and make decisions together. It's awesome. So they externalize the state of consciousness of democracy and shared power and the inclusiveness of all points of view. Well, now you understand that we're a long way from that. They externalized it. Well, some of them went inside like hermit crabs, and started using even the word democracy to inhabit it from a different state of consciousness. And so there are words today that are ruined, that are damaged, that we find hard to use because they have become awkward. In France, for example, the word religion has become inflammatory, which is really ridiculous. But you see, in France, the word religion just doesn't feel right. So when you talk about your famous awakening of consciousness, you're really talking about access to a memory. And I'd like to tell you something important. Something important that my experiences have shown me. We often have a very modern point of view when we imagine that we create consciousness, and that when you become aware of something, you feel like you've reinvented hot water, or the wheel, or whatnot. You really feel like you're discovering America. And really, we spiritualists are augmenting and encouraging these processes, and we really have this impression without realizing what we're doing. And the exclamations are, "Oh, I realized something." You feel like you're the very first. Try to remember, because I'm talking about memory, that you're only entering into collective and shared memories. There's no shame in not being original after all. If God exists, if there really is a creative principle, because my approach is completely rational, I don't see how nothing can create everything. Personally, you're really going to have to explain it to me, without sophistry and without stating the obvious, you see. So if there is a creative principle that contains everything and emanates it, and of course everything exists, there can't be a God if there are things that don't exist. When you have an awakening of consciousness, you've just recovered the memory of something. For me, Life is a succession of experiences of consciousness and therefore of memory. We've been taught soulless things, but in reality, that's normal. In other words, those who built Notre Dame and bequeathed it to their children. What were their children to do? Inhabiting the space, by trying to find in Notre Dame de Paris the memory that was programmed into it, the prayers, the attitudes, the state of consciousness that corresponded. With Notre Dame de Paris as a backdrop. Gradually, fewer and fewer people went to Notre Dame de Paris, and the faithful were replaced by tourist buses. And the last time I went to Notre Dame before the fire, I was baffled. I went in because there was one entrance. I was caught in a stream of people, carried and pushed along. So there were lots of Chinese, it's not the Japanese anymore, it's the Chinese, taking photos every 2 meters. So we went around in a circle and then I was expelled. I felt as if I'd been swallowed up and expelled again by a digestive system on the way out. And I thought, holy cow, that lasted 5 minutes. It was really fast-paced, with so many people having to see it. And so I do understand the people who look after Notre Dame have to manage the crowds. And I thought, what are we going to do in there? Nothing. Nothing at all. But what happens in nature when an organ, an organism, a being has died? What happens very quickly? Yes. For example, a tree is toppled by a storm. You can't see it, but immediately certain fungi start to settle in and digest the cellulose. Then you got wood-eating insects starting to attack it quietly. It's automatic. You know this if you've ever left a camembert cheese in your car, it goes off. Very quickly. We'll never be able to get out of this artificial conditioning, this artificial matrix, if we remain in these transgenerational memories. What should we do? We need to rediscover the origins of our heritage, the original meaning of what has been handed down to us. And so the first step is to accept your heritage. I don't know if you've ever had someone die in your family and you ended up at the notary's office. And the first paper they make you sign is that you accept the inheritance. And then you are in a huff because the notary tells you to be careful because there were debts. So you're saying, well, no, actually, I won't accept the inheritance because there are more debts than assets. If you accept the inheritance, you must take the assets with the debts. First step, you can't continue the adventure of consciousness if you don't accept the inheritance. Why? Because you're all about heritage, not just your ancestors. For example, I'm very much made up of the heritage handed down to me by the French education system. I spent all my days there. I don't know about you, but I spent all my days at school when I was a kid. I went to daycare before, school during, and daycare after. Yes, when your parents have to work. So a whole part of me was passed on to me by the Ministry of Education. You have to accept your inheritance. You have no choice in the matter since your inheritance is you. You are your ancestors today. Stop believing that your ancestors are your ancestors and that you are you. That wrong. You are them today. You are the totality of their experiences and memories, confronted with today's world and the realities we live in. What are you going to do with it? Stop being interested in what your ancestors did, what they said, what they thought, what they did, what they didn't do. There's no point in that. The challenge is here and now. Yes, but my father did this, my grandfather didn't do that, and my grandmother. Look, if you want, write novels, but it won't do you any good. Your transgenerational memory doesn't exist. Everything is being revisited now. You know, in poker, you go all in. I don't know how you say it in French. It means you put it all in. You bet it all. You know, you put all your chips on the table. Your transgenerational memory, it's all on the table today. Pleasant, unpleasant, inhuman, human, suffering, greatness, weakness, strength, all in. All on the carpet. It's you, here, now. What are you doing? Ask yourself this question. So, accept your heritage. Know that it's you today who's on the table. And your creative power is all there. It's all there. You see, for example, you've received from your ancestors, I don't know, a love of beauty, the gift of communication, empathy, patience, meticulousness, entrepreneurship, courage, whatever. I take qualities, yes. But, you know, when you're swept along by the current, you hold on to the branches. You don't hold on to the water, you hold on to what's stable and fixed. With number one, find at least one quality in yourself. That should do it. And try to tell yourself, why is it better to live with than without? Don't be satisfied with commonplaces and the obvious. It's better to live with patience than with impatience, kindness than anger. Well, yes, but you. Tell me why. For yourself. Look for the life experiences that show you this. So if you have ideas that appeal to you, that ignite you, that seem to you to be values to which you adhere, it's by transgenerational inheritance that you have them. You've got a taste for it. Ask yourself how you can inhabit and embody this thing, because then you'll be renewing this memory. You'll be inhabiting it from your state of consciousness today, in today's challenges, in today's situation. Because the artificial matrix has taken over mankind's memory and is constantly creating new ones. Memories are states of consciousness. It's huge. Absolutely huge. When Notre Dame burned down, I felt like I was there, witnessing it and participating in the catastrophe. Somehow, I've been made to have a bit of a recollection. I haven't really experienced it in real life. But there are lots of things like that. You listen to the news, and they make you take part in a lot of things that you don't really experience. The artificial matrix produces an enormous number of memories and states of consciousness. You see, for example, children who were wearing masks for months. We're going to do it to them again in a short while, and they'll say, "Oh, that reminds me of my childhood." Yes. We create memories by creating precedents. We create memories associated with states of consciousness. So we worked hard with the children to tell them, this is for your grandmother, because otherwise your grandmother will die. And then you have to submit, and you have to accept. Then you do it. And so you create a consciousness. In Quebec, for example, playgrounds are supervised. So there are loudspeakers, and someone is at the microphone, and if you sit down, they call you up by your name. You get up and walk. You're not allowed to sit in the playground. If you're playing with a child that is not your age, your name is called out over the loudspeaker, and you have to hurry back to your group. That's where we have gotten to. Children in Quebec, for example, are no longer allowed to jump in puddles. Truly. So that means that playgrounds in Quebec resemble prison camps. You have to work all the time, because the Ministry of Health has said that children don't move enough. They have to be active. And so the school board has decided children have to move. They can't be sitting down. It's for their own good. Does this mean that children will integrate and manufacture the memory and states of consciousness that are required, obey the loudspeakers. And when there will be loudspeakers on the streets announcing, number 345, you've crossed outside the crosswalk. Please get back on the sidewalk immediately. You've lost 2 social credit points. Well, these kids will get used to it. You understand? My parents' generation was used to going to Mass and not giving a damn. Looking at their watch, waiting for it to pass. It's completely emptied of any substance. As a result, I've never been there. And that's how you lose all the time. And you'll never be able to get out of the artificial matrix if you don't solve this problem. And I've thought a lot about this question because you see, when you say to yourself, I'm going to work on myself, I'm going to go inward to understand myself better, to understand interpersonal relationships, to understand the world, I want to evolve spiritually and all that. It's been, as I said, 33 years this year since I began this conscious process. And I've come to the conclusion that our problem is that we keep coming across these transgenerational memories. So I know I'm not the first to tell you this, and that there are some who offer methods of energetic therapy and so on. But personally, maybe there are some that work a bit, but I don't think it works totally. So I've found a more radical solution that really works for me. Every memory has its origin.
Dieu est la mémoire du monde. La mémoire du monde est Dieu. Vous, toutes les mémoires de ma vie, écoutez. Dieu est la seule mémoire du monde. Vous, toutes les mémoires de ma vie, écoutez la parole.